They thought she was just part of the furniture, a waitress, a nobody. Julian Vance, the tech billionaire, was minutes away from signing a deal that would cost him everything, laughing at the help, pouring his wine. But he didn't know that the woman standing quietly at his table wasn't always a waitress. He didn't know she could read the one language he couldn't. When she whispered, "I'll translate that for $500, he laughed in her face. But 10 seconds later, the laughter stopped, and the room went dead silent. This is the story of how a spilled secret destroyed an empire. The Obsidian Room was the kind of restaurant where the silence cost more than the food. It was a place of heavy velvet curtains, dark mahogany, and the hushed, reverent clinking of silver against bone china. Situated in the heart of Manhattan, it was where deals were struck not with handshakes, but with subtle nods over bottles of 1982 Petrus that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. For Lydia Cross, the Obsidian was a cage. At 34, Lydia had the kind of face that vanished easily. She wore the uniform, a stiff white shirt, a black waistcoat, and trousers that had been hemmed too many times, with a rigid military discipline. Her hair was pulled back so tight it hurt her temples, and her eyes, once bright and inquisitive, were now perpetually lowered. In the ecosystem of the Obsidian, she was not a person. She was a delivery system for proteins and ethanol, water, sparkling, and make sure it's actually cold this time, a voice snapped. Lydia didn't flinch. She pivoted on her heel, a bottle of San Pellegrino already balanced on her tray. Of course, Mr. Vance. Julian Vance. He was the center of gravity in the room tonight. At 42, Vance was the face of Vance Kelling Systems, a logistics software giant that had recently pivoted into rare earth mining. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, teeth that were too white, and wearing a navy bespoke suit that likely cost more than Lydia made in a year. He wasn't dining alone. Across from him sat two men who looked like they were carved out of granite. They were older, with thick, calloused hands that looked wrong, holding the delicate stems of the wine glasses. They spoke in low, guttural tones, their suits ill-fitting in the shoulders, their eyes scanning through the room with paranoid intensity. "More bread," one of the men grunted. He didn't look at Lydia. He looked at the bread basket as if it had offended him. "Immediately, sir," Lydia said softly. As she retreated to the kitchen, the noise of the main floor faded into the chaotic symphony of the back of house. Chefs were screaming orders, sous-chefs were sweating over searing pans of foie gras, and the expeditor, a terrifying Frenchman named Henri, was currently berating a busboy. "Table 9 needs a refill on the bread, and Vance wants another bottle of the Aero 5 Cabernet," Lydia announced, grabbing a fresh basket. "Vance is a pig," Henry muttered, wiping a plate with surgical precision. "But a pig with a platinum card. Move, Lydia, move!" Lydia hurried back out. She needed this job. The tips at the Obsidian were the only thing keeping the creditors away. It had been 3 years since her life had imploded. 3 years since she had been Dr. Lydia Cross, a forensic linguist for the State Department, specializing in Slavic and Balkan dialects. 3 years since the scandal that wasn't her fault, the disbarment of her fiancé that dragged her down with him, and the mountain of legal debt that followed. Now, she wasn't an expert on international contract law or dialect nuances. She was just the woman who brought the butter. When she returned to table 9, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick with tension. Julian Vance was leaning back in his chair, a look of arrogant triumph plastered across his face. He was twirling a fountain pen, a Mont Blanc limited edition, between his fingers. "It's a standard liability waiver, Julian," one of the men across from him said. His English was good, but the accent was thick. heavy like wet cement. We sign, you transfer the funds. The lithium rights in the Northern Valley are yours. Simple. Lydia poured the wine. She made herself invisible, a ghost in the periphery. But her ears, trained by years of decoding wiretaps and deciphering garbled audio evidence, were wide open. I know it's simple, Goran, Vance laughed, a booming sound that made heads turn at nearby tables. I just like to see you sweat. You boys are so serious. This is a celebration. I'm about to corner the market on European lithium processing. Then sign, the other man, the one called Victor, said. He slid a thick document across the table. It was bound in blue leather. Lydia finished pouring the wine. As she lifted the bottle, her eyes darted down to the document. It was open to the final page, the signature page, but the text above it wasn't English. It was Serbian, and not just standard Serbian. It was a dense, archaic dialect of legal Serbian often used in the rural provinces near the border, a dialect Lydia had spent 6 months studying during a chaotic assignment in Belgrade in her past life. I don't sign what I can't read, boys, Vance said, though his tone was mocking. My lawyers looked at the English draft yesterday. This is the official registration copy, Goran said, his voice dropping an octave. Required by local law. It is word for word the same as the English copy you approved. Trust me. Vance swirled his wine. He looked at the paper, then at the men. He was drunk on his own success, high on the idea of the billions he was about to make. He picked up the pen. I suppose I trust you. We're partners now, right? Lydia froze. Her eyes had locked onto a single paragraph just above the signature line. It was bolded, but buried in a wall of text. Odrykanje od vlastnictwa nad intelektualnym swoim. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that phrase. It didn't mean liability waiver. It meant relinquishment of intellectual property rights. She took a breath. She should walk away. It wasn't her business. If she spoke up, she would be fired. Henry would throw her out before she could take off her apron. She had rent due on Tuesday. She had a sick mother in a care facility in Queens who needed that paycheck. Vance lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered millimeters from the dotted line. More wine, sir? Lydia asked. Her voice was louder than she intended. Vance looked up, annoyed. The pen lifted. I'm fine, go away. She didn't move. She stood there, clutching the empty bottle, her knuckles white. The two men, Goran and Victor, stared at her with eyes like sharks smelling blood in the water. They knew she was lingering too long. I said, Vance snapped, his eyes narrowing, leave us. I can read that, Lydia said. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian Vance blinked. He looked at Lydia as if a golden retriever had just started reciting Shakespeare. He let out a short, incredulous scoff. Excuse me? Vance asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. You can read... What? The wine label? I certainly hope so, darling, considering it's your only job. Lydia felt the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation she had swallowed every day for 3 years, but the adrenaline was overriding the fear. She looked down at the document again to be sure. Yes. Paragraph 14, Section B. It was undeniable. The contract, Lydia said, her voice steadying. I can read the contract. Goran, the man on the left, shifted in his seat. His suit jacket strained as he leaned forward. She is drunk, Goran said to Vance. Tell the manager to remove her. No, wait, Vance said, holding up a hand. He found this amusing. He loved spectacle, especially when it involved belittling someone he considered beneath him. He turned his chair fully toward Lydia, looking her up and down with dismissive amusement. You're a waitress at a steakhouse, and you're telling me you can read complex legal Serbian. It's not just Serbian, Lydia corrected him. It's a provincial dialect from the Vojvodina region, specifically used in land disputes and heritage claims. It's distinct. Vance raised an eyebrow. The specificity of her answer caught him off guard. He glanced at Goran. Goran didn't look amused. He looked dangerous. She is lying, Victor spat. Just sign, Julian. We have a plane to catch. What does it say then? Vance challenged Lydia, ignoring Victor. If you're such a scholar, tell me. What does this mysterious document say? Lydia clutched the serving tray against her chest like a shield. I'm not supposed to discuss customer business. Vance laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a money clip. It was thick, gold, and loaded with crisp $100 bills. He peeled off 5 of them and slapped them onto the white tablecloth. $500, Vance said. Right now, it's yours. All you have to do is translate that one paragraph above the signature line. But if you're wrong, his eyes went cold. I'll have you fired, blacklisted from every restaurant in the city, and I might just sue you for harassment. The room seemed to tilt. $500 was 2 weeks of groceries. It was a payment toward her mother's medication. But the threat was real. Vance was a man who destroyed people for sport. Sir, Goran said, his voice dropping to a low growl. This is childish. Let us finish. I want to hear her, Vance said, his eyes locked on Lydia. Go on, translate it. Lydia looked at the money. Then she looked at the men. She saw the sweat beading on Goran's forehead. She saw the way Victor's hand had moved beneath the table, perhaps resting on his knee, or perhaps on something else. She stepped forward. She placed the empty wine bottle on the side table. I'll translate it for $500, Lydia repeated the words he had thrown at her. But I want the cash in hand first. Vance chuckled and shoved the bills toward her. Greedy, I like that. Take it. Lydia took the money. She didn't put it in her pocket. She set it on her tray. She leaned over the table, her finger hovering over the dense block of text. You think this paragraph confirms the transfer of the lithium mining rights to Vance Kelling Systems? Lydia began, her voice gaining the authority she had lost 3 years ago. The waitress Lydia was fading. Dr. Cross was stepping into the light. Obviously, Vance drawled. That's the deal. It doesn't, Lydia said. This paragraph, odrikanje odvlasništva, is a recursive clause. It states that by signing this document, the signatory, that's you, Mr. Vance, acknowledges that the entity known as Vance Kelling Systems is a subsidiary partner in the joint venture. Vance frowned. So? That's legal jargon. No, Lydia cut him off. Read the next line. Kao takav, sva postojeća intelektualna svojina matične kompanije postaje zajednička imovina. Which means, Vance asked, his smile faltering. It means, Lydia looked him dead in the eye. As such, all existing intellectual property of the parent company becomes shared assets. The silence that hit the table was deafening. Lydia continued ruthlessly. If you sign this, you aren't buying a mine, Mr. Vance. You are giving these 2 men full legal ownership of your software algorithms. You are signing over your company to them for the price of a hole in the ground in Serbia. Vance froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the document, then at the pen in his hand, and finally at Goran and Victor. Goran wasn't sweating anymore. His face had gone hard, stone cold. He stared at Lydia with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She is lying, Goran said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. It was tight, strained. Is she? Vance whispered. He slowly put the pen down. He looked at Lydia. Are you sure? I'm certain, Lydia said. The dialect uses the word zajednička for shared, but in this legal context, specifically in the Vojvodina statutes of 1994, it implies irrevocable transfer of access rights. They aren't asking for a partnership. They are executing a hostile takeover from the inside, and you were about to give them the keys. Vance looked at the two men. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. He had been played. He, the genius tech mogul, had been seconds away from giving away a billion-dollar empire because he was too arrogant to admit he couldn't read the fine print. "You," Vance started, looking at Goran. Victor stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of the entire restaurant. "The deal is off," Victor said, grabbing the blue leather portfolio. "Sit down," Vance commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "We are leaving," Goran said, standing up as well. He looked at Lydia. "You have a big mouth, little girl. Accidents happen to people with big mouths. Are you threatening my staff?" The voice didn't come from Vance. It came from the shadows behind Lydia. It was Henry, the manager. He had been watching, and behind him stood two of the restaurant's bouncers, large men who usually handled paparazzi. "Get out," Vance whispered to the two investors, "before I call the FBI and have this document translated by a federal court." Goran and Victor exchanged a look. They knew the game was up. The hustle had failed. Victor snatched the document, and without another word, they turned and stormed out of the restaurant, brushing past the stunned maitre d'. Vance sat alone at the large table. The two empty chairs stared back at him. He looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly. Lydia stood there, the $500 still on her tray. She felt the adrenaline crash. Her knees went weak. "Sir," she whispered. I should get back to work." She turned to leave. "Wait," Vance said. He didn't look up. He was staring at the tablecloth. "Who are you?" he asked. No waitress knows the Vojvodina statutes of 1994. Lydia paused. She looked at his back. "Just someone who needs the $500, Mr. Vance." She walked away. She made it to the kitchen, her heart pounding like a drum. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, closing her eyes, trying to breathe. She had just saved a billionaire. She had just made enemies of two dangerous men, and she had $500. She thought it was over. But 10 minutes later, Henri walked into the kitchen. He looked pale. "Lydia," he said, "Table 9 wants to see you again." "I can't," she said. "I have other tables." "You don't understand," Henri said, holding out a piece of paper. It was a napkin. On it was a phone number and a name written in the Mont Blanc ink. He cleared the restaurant. He bought out the entire night. Everyone is gone, except him. He says he's not leaving until you sit down with him. Lydia stared at the napkin. "He says he has a job for you," Henri added, "and he says he'll pay you $50,000 just to listen to the offer." $50,000. The number echoed in Lydia's mind as she walked back out onto the floor of the Obsidian. The restaurant was eerie. The other diners had been ushered out, their meals comped, the staff moving in the shadows like silent stagehands clearing a set. Julian Vance sat exactly where she had left him. The third bottle of wine was open now. He wasn't drinking it. He was staring at the door, waiting for her. He didn't look like a master of the universe anymore. He looked like a man who had just realized he was walking on a tightrope over a shark tank. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair where Goran had sat. Lydia hesitated. "Mr. Vance, Julian," he corrected. "And sit down, please. I paid Henri $3,000 to cover your shift for the next month. You're off the clock." Lydia sat. The chair was still warm from the Serbian conman. "You saved my life tonight." Julian said. He wasn't smiling. My company. It's everything. If they had taken the IP, I'd be dead. Professionally and likely financially. You would have figured it out, Lydia said, keeping her guard up. You have lawyers. My lawyers are idiots, Julian snapped. They saw the English version. They didn't think to check the Serbian registration, because these men came recommended by a senator I trust. A senator who, I am now realizing, is likely on their payroll. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Who are you, really? I looked you up on my phone while you were in the kitchen. Lydia Cross. No social media, no LinkedIn, just a few hits on a university archive from 5 years ago, and a news article about a disbarment. Lydia stiffened. I don't discuss my past. You were a prodigy, Julian said, ignoring her refusal. Youngest forensic linguist to consult for the DOJ in a decade. And then, poof, you vanish. Your fiancé, Robert Hale, gets caught laundering money for a cartel. You get implicated. He goes to prison. You lose your clearance, your career, and your reputation. I didn't do it, Lydia said. Her voice was ice. Robert used my accounts. I didn't know. I believe you, Julian said. Lydia looked at him, surprised. Why? Because if you were a criminal mastermind, you wouldn't be serving me steak for minimum wage plus tips. Julian gestured to the room. And you wouldn't have warned me. You would have let them ruin me and then sold the info to the highest bidder. He reached into his jacket pocket again. This time he didn't pull out cash. He pulled out a business card. It was black metal, heavy, with gold lettering. I have a problem, Lydia, Julian said. Those men, Goran and Victor, they represent a group called the Kovacic Syndicate. They are big. They are dangerous. And they have their hooks into a merger I'm trying to close in Zurich next week. That sounds like a problem for the FBI, Lydia said. The FBI takes months, Julian said. I have 4 days. If I don't close the Zurich deal, my stock tanks. If I do close it, and the syndicate is involved, they steal my company. He slid the metal card across the table. I need a translator, he said. Not someone who translates words. Someone who translates intent. Someone who can read the fine print in the dark. I need you to come to Zurich with me. Lydia laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Mr. Vance, I'm a waitress. I can't just leave. I have a mother in a care home. I have bills. I'll pay them, Julian said instantly. All of them. Your mother's care? Paid for a year in advance. Your debt? I'll clear it. Lydia stared at him. And in exchange? You be my eyes and ears. You sit in the meetings. You read the documents. You catch the lies. You do what you did tonight, but for the biggest deal of my life. And if I say no? Then you walk out of here with your $500, Julian said, and you go back to pouring water, and I go to Zurich alone, and I probably get eaten alive. Lydia looked at the metal card. It caught the dim light of the chandelier. It was a lifeline, a way out of the hole she had been digging for 3 years, but it was also a ticket into a world that had almost destroyed her once. I have conditions, Lydia said. Name them. I'm not your assistant. I'm not your help. I'm a consultant. My name goes on the payroll as a contractor. And if we get to Zurich and I smell anything illegal, anything that puts me in jeopardy, I walk, and I keep the money. Julian extended his hand. Deal. Lydia looked at his hand. It was manicured, soft, but his grip was firm. She shook it. One more thing, Lydia said. I need a new wardrobe. I can't negotiate with billionaires wearing a waiter's uniform. Julian smirked. Be at the Teterboro private airfield at 8 a.m. Bring your passport. We'll handle the clothes in Paris before we head to Zurich. Lydia stood up. She felt lightheaded. She was leaving the obsidian. She was leaving the cage. But as she walked out into the cool New York night, she didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. She didn't see the man in the driver's seat snap a photo of her as she hailed a cab. And she didn't hear him speak into his phone. "We have a problem," the man said in Serbian. Vance hired the girl, the one who reads the dialect. On the other end of the line, a voice, cold as the grave, replied, "Then she is no longer a waitress. She is a target. Do not let them reach Zurich." The Gulfstream G650 sliced through the clouds above the Atlantic, a silver bullet racing against the sun. Inside, the cabin was quieter than a library. The beige leather seats smelled of money, that specific scent of newness and exclusivity that Lydia hadn't smelled in years. She sat opposite Julian Vance, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. He hadn't slept. He was poring over files, his eyes scanning screens with a manic intensity. "You're staring," Julian said without looking up. Lydia adjusted the hem of her worn-out cardigan. "I'm wondering why we're stopping in Paris. Zurich is the destination. Every hour we waste is an hour the syndicate has to regroup." Julian finally looked at her. The bags under his eyes were dark purple bruises. "Because, Dr. Cross, you currently look like a woman who is afraid of her own shadow. If you walk into a boardroom in Zurich wearing that," he gestured vaguely at her outfit, "Zeller and his sharks will eat you alive before you even open your mouth. Perception is leverage. In Zurich, you need to look like you own the building, not like you're cleaning it." "I don't care about clothes," Lydia said stiffly. "I do," Julian countered. "We have a 4-hour layover. We're going to Avenue Montaigne. Consider it part of your cover. You are my chief strategy officer now. Act like it." They landed at Le Bourget, just as the dawn was breaking over Paris. A black Mercedes V-Class was waiting on the tarmac. The driver, a mute giant named Pascal, held the door open. Paris was grey and drizzling, the cobblestones slick with rain. They drove in silence to a boutique that didn't have a sign, just a heavy black door and a buzzer. Inside, it was a sanctuary of silk, cashmere, and wool. An older woman with silver hair and glasses hanging on a chain greeted Julian with a kiss on both cheeks. "Madame Dubois," Julian said. "This is Lydia. She needs the full armor." "Armor," Madame Dubois repeated, looking Lydia up and down with critical professional eyes. "Yes, I see. She has the posture of a soldier, but the clothes of a refugee. We will fix this." For 2 hours, Lydia was pinned, tucked, and draped. She tried to detach herself from the process. But as she stood in front of the three-way mirror, wearing a tailored navy pantsuit that fit like a second skin, she felt a shift. The waitress Lydia, who apologized for existing, was gone. The woman in the mirror looked sharp, dangerous. "Better," Julian said, looking up from his phone. "Now, the coat, and shoes that can kill." As Lydia was fastening the strap of a pair of black stilettos, her phone buzzed in her purse. It was a burner phone Julian had given her on the plane. Unknown number. She frowned. Only Julian had this number. She answered it. "Hello? Don't get in the car," a voice said. It was distorted, digital. "The driver is paid. The brakes are cut." The line went dead. Lydia froze. She looked out the shop window. Pascal, the driver, was standing by the Mercedes, smoking a cigarette. He looked bored. Normal. "Lydia, you ready?" Julian asked, standing up. "We're on a tight schedule." Lydia looked at Julian, then at Pascal outside. Her mind raced. Was it a prank, a bluff, or was the syndicate already here? "We're not taking the car," Lydia said, her voice low. Julian frowned. "What?" "Pascal has been my driver in Paris for 5 years. "I just got a call," Lydia whispered, moving away from the window. Someone said the brakes are cut. Julian's face hardened. Who called? I don't know. But look at Pascal. They watched through the glass. Pascal finished his cigarette. He checked his watch. Then he looked up, not at the door, but at the rooftops across the street. He nodded, a barely perceptible motion. He's signaling, Lydia said. Julian, is there a back exit? I think so, Julian said, the colour draining from his face. Madame Dubois, Lydia called out, switching to fluent, rapid-fire French. Is there a service exit? We have paparazzi out front. We need to leave quietly. Madame Dubois didn't ask questions. She pointed to a velvet curtain at the back. Through the stockroom, into the alley. Go, Lydia ordered Julian. My luggage. Leave it. They bolted through the back. The alley was narrow, smelling of wet cardboard and old wine. They emerged onto a side street, just as a delivery truck rumbled past. Taxi! Julian yelled, waving his arm. A cab screeched to a halt. They dove inside. Airport! Julian barked. Fast! As the taxi pulled away, merging into the chaotic Parisian traffic, a loud boom echoed from the street they had just left. Lydia whipped around. Through the rear window, she saw a plume of black smoke rising above the rooftops near the boutique. It wasn't the brakes, Lydia whispered, her hands shaking as she clutched her new leather portfolio. It was a bomb. Julian stared at the smoke, then at Lydia. He looked terrified. How? Who called you? I don't know, Lydia said. She looked at the burner phone. It was silent. But whoever it is, they aren't trying to kill us. They're trying to play us. Or, Julian said grimly, they want me alive just long enough to sign something. He loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. Lydia, this deal in Zurich, it's not just a merger. I didn't tell you everything. Lydia turned to him, her eyes narrowing. You told me it was a merger to expand into banking. It is, Julian said. But the bank, Ethelgard, they hold something of mine. Something collateral. What did you give them, Julian? He looked out the window at the grey sky. My source code, the core algorithm for the Vance-Kelling logistics AI. If I don't close this deal by Friday, they execute a default clause. They take the code, and if they take the code, they own global shipping, every route, every truck, every plane. They can cripple economies with a keystroke. Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp Paris air. She wasn't just translating a contract. She was helping a desperate man defuse a nuclear bomb. And the syndicate? She asked. They want the bank, Julian said. They're trying to buy Ethelgard before I can merge with it. If they get the bank, they get my code. Lydia looked at the phone again. So we have a third player. Someone who hates the syndicate enough to save us, but hates us enough to keep us terrified. Welcome to high finance, Julian muttered, pouring himself a drink from a flask he produced from his pocket. Still want the 50,000. Lydia looked at her new suit. It felt like armor, indeed, but armor was heavy. Drive faster, she told the taxi driver. Zurich was a city of clocks and secrets. The air was crisp, clean, and indifferent to human suffering. They checked into the Dolder Grand, a castle-like hotel overlooking the lake. Julian had booked the entire West Wing to ensure privacy, hiring a private security firm to sweep the rooms. But after Paris, Lydia trusted no one. She checked the vents, the mirrors, the phones. It's clear, the head of security, a burly ex-Mossad agent named Cohen, assured them. Nothing is ever clear, Lydia muttered, unpacking her meager belongings alongside the thousands of dollars of new clothes. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at the headquarters of Ethelgard. It was a glass fortress in the financial district, a building so transparent it felt like it had nothing to hide, which usually meant it was hiding everything. Julian was a nervous wreck. He paced the suite, rehearsing his pitch. "We go in. We offer the cash plus the equity swap. We sign the papers," Julian said, mostly to himself. "Zeller is a traditionalist. He likes respect. We show respect." "We show strength," Lydia corrected him. "If you walk in there sweating like that, he'll smell the desperation. You need to be the billionaire who doesn't need them." "But I do need them," Julian hissed. "They don't know that," Lydia said. "Not for sure. We bluff." They arrived at Ethelgard precisely at 1:55 p.m. The lobby was a cathedral of marble. They were escorted to the top floor, to a conference room that seemed to float above the city. Seated at the head of a long, oval table was Heinrich Zeller. He was a small man, impeccably dressed, with skin like parchment and eyes like beads of black glass. Beside him sat a younger woman, severe and beautiful, typing on a laptop. And standing near the window, looking at the view, was a man Lydia recognized instantly. Her breath hitched. It was Miles Thorne, the lawyer who had represented her fiancé, Robert, the man who had convinced Robert to take the plea deal that implicated Lydia, the man who had looked her in the eye and told her it was for the best, while he torched her career to save his own reputation with the firm. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in New York, climbing the ladder at prestige law firms. Miles turned. He saw Julian and smiled, a practiced, shark-like smile. Then his eyes slid to Lydia. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine shock. Then it was gone, replaced by a smooth, oily mask of recognition. "Julian," Miles said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "Good to see you. And Miss Cross? My God, it's been years." Julian looked between them. "You know each other?" "We have a history," Lydia said, her voice steady despite the rage boiling in her gut. "Mr. Thorne was my former fiancé's attorney." "Small world," Miles said lightly. "I'm consulting for Herr Zeller on the American regulatory aspects of the merger." "I see," Julian said, though he looked unsettled. They sat down. Zeller did not stand. He simply nodded. "Mr. Vance," Zeller said. His voice was soft, heavily accented with Swiss German. "You are late." "We are on time," Julian said, checking his watch. 2:00 p.m. exactly. "In Zurich, on time is late," Zeller said without humor. "But let us begin. You wish to acquire a controlling stake in Ethelgard to secure your intellectual property." "I wish to merge our strengths," Julian corrected. Zeller gestured to the woman beside him. She slid a document across the table. It was thick. "The terms have changed," Zeller said. Julian froze. "We had a term sheet. It was agreed upon last week." "Markets fluctuate," Miles Thorne interjected smoothly. "Given the recent instability in your sector and the rumors regarding the Kovacic syndicate's interest, Ethelgard requires additional assurances." Lydia pulled the document toward her. She opened it. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in Serbian. It was in High German. But as she scanned the text, she noticed something odd. The syntax was wrong. It was overly complex, filled with archaic phrasings that didn't belong in a modern contract. "Lydia?" Julian asked nervously. Lydia read silently. Paragraph 4, Section C. Der Unterzeichner stimmt zu, dass alle zukünftigen Derivate. They want the derivatives, Lydia said, not just the current code. Any future AI you develop based on the current architecture. That's standard, Miles said. No, Lydia looked up, locking eyes with Miles. It's not. And that's not all. The jurisdiction clause, it's been moved. She flipped to the back. This contract is governed by the laws of the canton of Zug, Lydia said, specifically the arbitration courts. Zug is crypto-friendly, Miles shrugged. It's modern. It's also where privacy laws are impenetrable, Lydia said. If there is a dispute, the arbitration is sealed. No public record. Meaning if they steal your company, you can't even tell the press. Zeller tapped his finger on the table. You have a sharp assistant, Mr. Vance. She's my partner, Julian said, his voice gaining strength from Lydia's catch. And we aren't signing this. Then the deal is dead, Zeller said simply. And tomorrow, at noon, your loan defaults. We take the code. The room went cold. It was an ambush. However, Miles said, leaning forward, there is an alternative. He slid a second, thinner folder across the table. A personal guarantee, Miles said. You sign over your personal assets, your homes, your private accounts, your stock options, as collateral. In exchange, we remove the derivative clause. You keep your future tech. We just want to know you have skin in the game. Julian looked at the folder. It was a lifeline, a way to save his life's work. Don't do it, Lydia whispered. I have to, Julian whispered back. I can't lose the code. Julian, look at the language, Lydia hissed, pointing at the thin document. It's not German. Julian looked. It looks like German. It's Swiss German, Lydia said. A dialect, specifically a Bernese dialect used in banking secrecy. She read the line rapidly. All assets held in trust by the signatory. Her eyes widened. Julian, she said, her voice trembling. This doesn't just pledge your assets, it grants them power of attorney. If you sign this, they don't just get your money if you default. They get the legal right to sign documents as you immediately. What? Julian gasped. If you sign this, Lydia said, staring at Miles, they will use your power of attorney to sign the first contract, the one giving them everything, 5 minutes after you leave this room. And you won't be able to stop them because, legally, you will have done it. Julian dropped the pen as if it were red hot. He looked at Miles with pure betrayal. You snake, Julian breathed. Miles didn't flinch. He just smiled, a cold, dead smile. It's business, Julian. You're over-leveraged. You're weak. We're just cleaning up the mess. Zeller sighed. A pity. We could have done this the easy way. Zeller pressed a button under the table. The doors to the conference room locked with a heavy magnetic thud. Mr. Vance, Zeller said, standing up slowly. You are not leaving this room until one of these documents is signed. Lydia stood up, her heart hammering. She looked at the glass walls. They were 30 floors up. There was no way out. This is kidnapping, Lydia said. This is a high-stakes negotiation, Miles replied, checking his cufflinks. And I suggest you sit down, Lydia. You're out of your depth. Again. Julian looked at Lydia. He was terrified. He was a tech guy, not a fighter. Lydia's mind flashed back to the bomb in Paris, the warning call. Someone was watching. She grabbed the pitcher of water from the center of the table. I'm not out of my depth, Miles, she said. I'm just expensive. She hurled the heavy crystal pitcher not at Zeller or Miles, but at the massive floor-to-ceiling window behind them. It struck the glass with a sickening crack. The reinforced safety glass didn't shatter, but it spiderwebbed, a massive white fracture obscuring the view of the city. The noise was deafening. Security alarms began to blare instantly. "What are you doing?" Zeller screamed, losing his composure for the first time. "Triggering the building's automated lockdown override," Lydia shouted over the siren. "Fire safety protocol. All magnetic locks disengage in 10 seconds. She grabbed Julian's arm. "Get ready to run." Miles lunged across the table, grabbing for the documents. "Security! Get them!" The door clicked. The green light flashed. Lydia kicked off her heels. "Run!" They burst out of the room. sprinting down the marble hallway as Zeller's guards scrambled from the elevators. They hit the stairwell, Julian panting, Lydia leading the way barefoot, the alarms screaming around them. They had escaped the room, but they were still in the building, and now they were hunted. As they spiraled down the stairs, Lydia's burner phone buzzed again. She answered it as she ran. "You're making a mess," the distorted voice said. "I'm making an exit," Lydia panted. "Who are you?" "Go to the parking garage, level B4. Look for the grey Audi. Keys are in the wheel well." "Why are you helping us?" "Because," the voice said, and for a second the distortion slipped, revealing a woman's voice. "I want to kill Miles Thorne myself, and I need you to lead him to me." The stairwell was a concrete echo chamber of their own panic. Lydia ran barefoot, the cold stone biting into her soles, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Julian was right behind her, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the steps. Above them, the heavy thud of security doors opening echoed like gunshots. "Faster!" Lydia hissed, grabbing the railing and swinging herself down the landing. They burst onto level B4 of the parking garage. It was dimly lit, smelling of gasoline and damp concrete. Rows of luxury cars sat in silent judgment. "Grey Audi," Julian panted, scanning the rows. "There." An Audi RS7, sleek and slate grey, was parked near the pillar labelled "Reserved." Lydia sprinted to it. She dropped to her knees by the front left tyre, her hand scrambling inside the wheel well. Her fingers brushed against cold metal, a magnetic key box. "Got it." She ripped it open, grabbed the fob, and unlocked the car. The lights flashed a welcoming orange. They dove inside, just as the elevator doors across the garage pinged open. Two men in dark suits stepped out, guns drawn. "Get down!" Lydia screamed, jamming her foot onto the brake and hitting the start button. The engine roared to life with a guttural growl. She didn't wait for Julian to buckle up. She slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching, and backed out in a violent J-turn. A bullet sparked off the rear fender. "They're shooting at us!" Julian yelled, cowering in the passenger seat. "Hold on!" Lydia floored it. The Audi launched forward. She aimed not for the exit ramp, which was blocked by a lowering gate, but for the wooden arm of the entrance lane. They smashed through the barrier, splinters of wood flying over the windshield, and burst out into the blinding Zurich afternoon. Lydia wove through traffic, ignoring the honking horns, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. A black SUV was already peeling out of the garage behind them. "Phone," Lydia commanded. "Put it on speaker." Julian fumbled with the burner phone. "We're out. We're being followed." The distorted voice returned. "Head south, toward Wollishofen. Get on the A3 highway. I'm sending coordinates to the car's GPS." "Who are you?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking. "Why do you have a car waiting in the bank's garage?" "Because I used to work there," the voice said. "Drive, and don't stop until you reach the safe house in Glarus." The next hour was a blur of adrenaline. Lydia drove with a cold, terrifying focus. She watched the black SUV weave through traffic behind them, but the Audi had more power. Once they hit the highway and the traffic thinned, she pushed the car to 200 kilometers per hour. The pursuers faded into the distance, unable to match the speed on the winding alpine roads. They followed the GPS deep into the mountains, past snow-capped peaks and silent valleys. The coordinates led them off the main road, up a gravel track hidden by dense pine trees, to a secluded wooden chalet that looked abandoned. Lydia killed the engine. The silence of the mountains rushed in, ringing in her ears. "We can't stay here," Julian said, trembling. "They'll find us." "They won't," a voice said from the porch. A woman stepped out of the shadows. She was in her 50s, wearing a thick wool sweater and holding a hunting rifle. Her face was lined with grief, but her eyes were sharp steel. "Get inside," the woman said. before the satellite sweep picks up the engine heat." Inside, the chalet was warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. The woman lowered the rifle and looked at Julian. "You look like your father," she said. Julian blinked. "You knew my father. I was his compliance officer at Ethelgard 20 years ago," the woman said. "My name is Ingrid, and I know exactly what Miles and Zeller are trying to do." "They want the code," Lydia said, sinking onto a sofa, rubbing her freezing feet. "They want more than the code," Ingrid corrected. She walked to a table covered in monitors and papers. "Do you know why Ethelgard is so desperate for your logistics AI, Mr. Vance? It's not to track shipping containers." Ingrid tapped a key on a laptop. A map of the world appeared, covered in red lines. "The Kovacic Syndicate moves product," Ingrid said. "Weapons, narcotics, human trafficking. But their biggest problem is the supply chain. They lose 20% of their shipment to seizures and border checks. Your AI, it predicts bottlenecks. It reroutes automatically to avoid delays. If they integrate your code into their smuggling network, they can predict law enforcement patterns. They can reroute illegal cargo in real time before customs even knows it's there. It would make them untouchable." Julian looked sick. "They want to turn my life's work into a smuggling tool." "And Zeller is the broker," Ingrid said. "He gets a cut of every shipment. Miles is the legal architect. He set up the shell companies to absorb your IP." "But we ran," Julian said. "They can't make me sign." "They don't need you to sign anymore," Lydia realized, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She looked at Julian. "The power of attorney document, the one you didn't sign." "I didn't sign it," Julian insisted. I dropped the pen. "Did you touch the paper?" Lydia asked. Julian frowned. I think I held the folder." Lydia looked at Ingrid. "Fingerprints?" "Worse," Ingrid said. "Digital authorization. In Zurich, high-frequency trading accounts can be authorized by biometric proximity if a pre-agreement exists. Miles had your phone paired to the room's local network, didn't he?" Julian checked his pocket. His main phone was gone. I left it on the table when we ran." Ingrid slammed her hand on the desk. "They have your phone. They have your biometric data. They have the unsigned contract. With a corrupt notary, which Zeller definitely has, they can override the signature requirement by claiming verbal assent confirmed by the device's presence. It's a loophole called implied execution." "When?" Lydia asked. "The markets close at 5 p.m., Ingrid said, but the international transfer window for IP registration closes at 6 p.m. That's in 2 hours. Julian put his head in his hands. "It's over. I can't stop a digital transfer from a mountain cabin." Lydia stood up. The firelight cast long shadows across her face. She looked at the expensive suit she was wearing, now ruined by rain and dirt. She looked at the bruises forming on her bare feet. "We don't need to stop the transfer," Lydia said. "We need to poison the well." Julian looked up. "What?" "You said the AI learns," Lydia said. "It adapts to language, to commands." "Yes," Julian said. "It uses natural language processing." "And Miles doesn't speak the code," Lydia said. "He hires people to manage it, but he thinks he understands the law." She turned to Ingrid. "Can you get us a link to the Ethelgard internal server? Not to block them, but to send a message?" "I have a back door," Ingrid said, "but it's read-only. We can't change the code." "We don't need to change the code," Lydia said, a dangerous smile forming on her lips. "We just need to update the translation layer. Julian, if I dictate a set of linguistic parameters that redefines asset as liability in the command syntax, what happens?" Julian's eyes widened. The AI would invert its logic. It would flag every optimized route as a high-risk failure. It would shut down the entire network to prevent loss. Exactly, Lydia said. They want to steal the machine. Let's make sure that when they turn it on, it eats them alive. But we need a terminal, Julian said. And my phone is in that conference room. No, Lydia said. We don't need your phone. We need a public interface, a place where the bank system interacts with the outside world. Ingrid smiled. The gala. The what? Julian asked. Tonight, Ingrid said. Zeller is hosting the Future of Finance gala at the Zurich Opera House. He's planning to announce the acquisition live on stage at 7 p.m. To show off, he always connects the bank's live server to the main screen to display the real-time asset transfer. Lydia grabbed her heels from the floor. She winced as she shoved her bruised feet back into them. Then we're going to the opera, Lydia said, and I'm going to translate one last thing for Mr. Miles. The Zurich Opera House glittered with Europe's elite. On stage, Heinrich Zeller and Miles Thorne stood beneath a massive screen displaying the Vance-Kelling merger progress bar. The assets are secured, Miles announced, tapping his tablet. The bar hit 99%. Suddenly the screen froze. The progress bar turned blood red. Massive text erupted across the display, not in English, but in Cyrillic Serbian. Syntax error. Moral compass not found. The crowd gasped. Before Miles could react, audio blasted through the opera speakers, a crystal-clear recording of his voice from the conference room. If you sign this, they get the legal right to sign documents as you. We're just cleaning up the mess. Cut the feed, Miles screamed, his face draining of color. You can't, a voice rang out. A spotlight swung to the center aisle, illuminating Lydia. She wore a borrowed red gown like a suit of armor, standing tall beside Julian. The AI isn't glitching, Miles. It's translating your hidden clauses into evidence for the police. Sirens wailed outside, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. Officers swarmed the stage. Zeller tried to run but was tackled by security. Miles stood frozen, watching his career dissolve in pixels on the screen above him as the handcuffs clicked shut. 3 days later, on the sunlit terrace of the Dolder Grand, Julian slid a check for $50,000 across the table. As agreed, Julian said, looking relieved. Lydia looked at the check, then slid it back. She pulled a document from her bag. I don't want a tip, Julian. I want equity. 10% of the company, and a seat on the board. Julian laughed, tearing up the check. He took a pen and signed the document immediately. You're an expensive waitress, Lydia. Lydia smiled, looking out at the mountains. I'm not a waitress anymore. I'm a partner. And that is how a single spilled secret and a waitress who refused to be silenced took down a billion-dollar criminal empire. Lydia Cross proves that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one signing the checks, but the one reading the fine print. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and high-stakes revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. What would you have done in Lydia's shoes? Would you have taken the $500 and walked away? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.